Welcome to another edition of our treatment of the International Sunday School lesson. Today's lesson is entitled An Executed Scoundrel, and it's for April the 19th, 2020, spring quarter, lesson number 8. And it's taken from the book of Esther, the 7th chapter, verses 1 through 9. Now, we could spend the entire 30 minutes giving background information on today's lesson, but I'm going to really try to distill it down to just the very basic pieces of information in preparation for the story today. The children of Israel had been under rebellion, and their Nebuchadnezzar had came down and took them off into captivity. And then after a certain number of years, the Babylonian kingdom had been taken over by the Persians. And this story is about the Jews who were taken off into captivity, and the Persians were now over them. And there was a young lady by the name of Esther who was living with her kinfolk, Mordecai, and Mordecai was associated with the Persian court. And also another man by the name of Haman was associated with the Persian court. They both had places in the Persian court. And Mordecai, as he is going about his day-to-day business, he discovers a plot to kill the Persian ruler. And so he turns these people in and thwarts that plot. Also, too, Mordecai had worked out a situation. The ruler of Persia had gotten rid of his first wife, and Mordecai had worked out a situation where Esther, his niece, would be able to marry the ruler of Persia. And time had went on. Esther was taking her place in a very prominent place in the Persian court. And as time went on, Haman had also risen to a good bit of power in the Persian court, and there had been a rule set down for people to bow down to Haman. And Mordecai, being a good Jew and not wanting to do any kind of idolatry, refused to bow down and worship Haman. And Haman had begun to be very jealous and just hate Mordecai. And by extension had hated the people that Mordecai was associated with, which was the Jews. And Haman, because Mordecai had resisted him, Haman plotted to kill Mordecai, and he built these gallows to hang Mordecai upon these gallows. And that's pretty much, in a very short description, that's pretty much where we are at in today's story. Okay, Esther, 7th chapter, verses 1 and 2. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Now, here we have a series of seemingly unconnected events had brought Esther to the court of Persia. But as we begin to see, as this story unfolds, that there was a divine plan going on here, where Esther had to be at the right place at the right time. And uniquely, the book of Esther is the only book in the Bible where God is not specifically mentioned. Yet you see his hands all through the book as all of the things are getting put into place to save the children of Israel. And the fact that Esther was sitting at this party, and that this party had happened, and the king had been drinking for 2 days, and was feeling, as a lot of people who would be drinking for 2 days would feel, extremely generous. And he makes this exorbitant offer to Queen Esther. Tell me, what is your petition? I'll give it to you up to half of the kingdom, whatever it is. Just make the request. Esther, 7th chapter, verse 3 and 4. Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, but caused no such distress would justify disturbing the king." And see, Haman had devised this scheme to not only go after Mordecai, but absolutely all of the Jews. And he didn't even realize that Queen Esther was a Jew. And so Esther begins to describe the horrible predicament that the children of Israel, including Queen Esther, the horrible predicament that they were in. They were under a death sentence. And because the king had placed himself into this position and had already made the promise, it carried an enormous amount of weight. And all of these different various events synchronized in perfect timing, at the right time, at the right place, at the time that the destroyer was about ready to lay a fatal blow on the people of God. Everything was falling in place. Esther, 7th chapter, verses 5 through 7. But King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther said, "An adversary, an enemy, this vile Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. So we see here how that because Esther was in the right place at the right time, and God had synchronized it. And even to have the irony of the entire thing, to have Haman there when it's all revealed, and have Haman there to see how his plan was going to completely come unraveled at this moment. And to see all of these things come to bear and take place in the perfect order that things are in. And Haman is going to try one last ditch effort to save his life, because he could tell by the countenance of the king and how he had left the area in a rage, and he could tell that he was in very deep trouble. Now, Esther, the 7th chapter, the 8th verse. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So we see here, just to really completely reinforce the king's rage, how that Haman was sitting on the couch with the queen, which was at that time was a completely inappropriate thing to do. And as he was begging the queen for mercy, and then the king comes in and sees this, the presumptuousness of Haman to be sitting there on the couch with the queen, the wife of the king. It completely solidified the fate of Haman. Okay, Esther, 7th chapter, 9th verse. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, "A pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house." He had set it up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king said, "Impale him on it." Now here we see the absolute irony in this entire story. And this is something we all need to take to heart. As we may have jealousies, may want to do somebody in, may want to sow discord, may want to contrive and come up with devices to do that person in that you got a jealousy against at work, in the church, in your family, in your neighborhood. That there is an irony that often happens to where people will sit there and have things blow up, and they had actually made the trap for someone else. You know, the writer of Proverbs, one of the writers in Proverbs, had said more or less the same thing. Proverbs, the 26th chapter, verses 24 through 28. Enemies disguise themselves with their lips, but in their hearts they harbor deceit. Though their speech is charming, do not believe them, for 7 abominations fill their hearts. Their malice may be concealed by deception, but their wickedness will be exposed in the assembly. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. A lying tongue hurts those it hurts, and a flattering mouth works ruin. Friends, that's something that we all need to remember to take to heart. How that if we are sowing discord, if we are contriving traps to entrap somebody else, and we are laying plots to do somebody in, that oftentimes there's throwback, and it comes back upon us. And that's especially true if you're a child of God. Because see, the Lord, whom He loves, He chasteneth. And if you've really truly been saved and you're trying to do in somebody, the Lord will punish you for that. You're going to get a spanking from the Lord for doing that kind of stuff. It will fall back on you. You will not get away with it, because God will give you an educational experience in your life if you try doing that kind of stuff. Because like I said, it is in the Bible and it's the absolute utter truth. Whom the Lord loves, He chasteneth. Concluding thoughts. Okay, now let's really stop and think about the book of Esther. The book of Esther has got some beautiful truths in it. Even though the name of God does not occur in that book. And the couple of things that I've mentioned in passing that the book of Esther teaches us is how that God has got a plan that goes and He will put us exactly where we need to be, and will work things out to put us in that position that we need to be at to do the things that He has for us to do. There's another truth that is in the book of Esther, and even in the story that we got today from the book of Esther, and that is Esther was obedient. If she had sat there and said, I'm here as queen, this is never going to fall back on me, I'm still going to keep sitting on this throne, and Xerxes is going to still be my husband, and I don't have to worry about nothing. All I got to do is just sit here and keep my mouth shut, not stir up any kind of trouble. Everything's going to be all right. She could have done that, and if she had of, all of that synchronization that God did would have been for nothing if she had not fallen through and went through with the things that God had for her to do. We have to be in the position where God puts us in. We have to be obedient to obey God and do what God would have for us to do. or it's all for nothing. And the other thing is we have to really take the story of Haman to heart and really stop and think about this guy. How that he was completely caught up in his arrogance, in being so full of himself. And he had to get all this praise, and he had to have all this recognition. And he was so consumed with his jealousy and with his hatefulness that he was making these plans, and he went ahead and took the effort to go ahead and build the gallows. He was going to really show everybody. And the gallows that he built, he ended up being impaled on those gallows himself. So be careful for the plots and everything that you're laying for someone else, because it could really, really backfire on you. Beware of those evil designs that you go after somebody with. Okay? Remember years ago when I was teaching Taekwondo, I had one of the students. He was really wound up and was really trying to hurt me. And so I was blocking his kicks and everything. And he started grabbing his legs saying, man, it's hurting. And I said, well, if you don't kick so hard, the blocks won't hurt so bad. And a lot of times that's what happens is you go after somebody to try to do them in, and you're putting all that force in doing them in, you end up hurting yourself more than you end up hurting them. And that happens a lot of times. Be kind-hearted. Be humble. Be obedient. Life will be a lot easier and a lot better on you if you are. Well, friends, good Lord willing, we'll be back with you next weekend.